of the industries did not like, because they said women are burdened, because once they get pregnant, the pregnancy continues, and then we cannot keep paying them. But the women claimed that no, this is, as a woman, this is one of the basic natural rights that I have, and that is to become a mother. And therefore, the right has to be given. So in the US, the movement became very successful and gradually shifted on to Europe. A very famous name that comes up in 1909, the one who gave form to the movement, strength to the movement, was Carla Zetkins, Zetkins. Carla Zetkins emerged as a leader. And in many of the European countries, especially in Denmark and in the other regions of Netherlands, where trade had grown and textile trade had grown, women began to form very, very strong unions. So with this, women began the fight to attain equal rights as men enjoyed. And it caught on steadily. A large number of nations, we have women forces that got consolidated into unions. But one very, very important date would be for the women's movement. And that is how it actually began and crystallized further, was the Russian Revolution of 1917. Just as in the case of the French Revolution, in the case of the Russian Revolution, women had a lot to lose under the Tsars who were then ruling over USSR, then USSR, then Russia, now later on USSR. Now these women again took to the streets, clamored for their rights, and the first such rebellion took place in Petrograd, where a huge number of women demanded better wages and better conditions to live in. And it is here that even child rights began to be focused. That if the children are brought up in the kind of atmosphere that then prevailed in industrial towns, children would grow up as sick individuals and would not contribute as citizens to the country that they belong to. So the Russian women were the leaders of the movement. Men followed behind. And they began to clamor that we want bread, we want money, we want health facilities, and better living facilities. Because the Russians then followed the Julian calendar, so the date would somewhere be around 27th, 28th February that the women's movement took a very, very strong shape in Russia. And later on, as the world moved towards the Gregorian calendar, from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, the date that was finalized was 8th March. And from 8th March, the celebration of the International Women's Day began in most of the countries, and especially those who were signatories of the UN. When women came together, obviously there would be conferences where women from all over the world came together, and they began to draft charters, one of the latest and very important being the one in 1995 in Beijing. The Beijing Women's Conference gave a lot of rights to women, especially even in India. And there were quite a few activists from Patna who had attended the Women's Conference at Beijing. It was here in Beijing that it was decided that women must have a say in the decision making bodies. For example, the parliament, the assemblies, the state assemblies, and further down, the panchayats. And that if sufficient number of women are not there, then in that case, there should be reservation for women. So politics becomes important. Political change, according to women, can only take place when the parliament reverberates with the sound, with the voices of women. Therefore, in our plans also, if you look at the plan documents in India, you would find that initially the plan documents focused on women's development, as if somebody else is going to develop things for us. Somebody is extremely kind, so far as the men folk are concerned. And so they would give a little bit of educational rights, a little bit of marriage rights to the women. Later on, as in the entire plan committees, women moved in. They said that the phrase, that the two words should be changed and a new phrase that should be put in, and that is women in development. So whenever we talk about development, there has to be the presence of women there. And this is how today policy formulations have sufficient number of women in the various committees. And I think you know that India's finance minister, usually what happened earlier was the bureaucrats, women bureaucrats, and the women ministers would be getting portfolios that particularly related to women. For example, woman and child had always to be given to women, as if that is one portfolio that men could not man. But later again, the concepts began to change. And so we have secretary rank officers, the highest officers in the center, who look after agriculture, some of them. Some of them even moved ahead to look after finances. For example, as I said, the present finance minister is a woman. This was considered to be a man's domain, basically, as if women did not understand what finance is. We have some other great parliamentarians now who not only speak about, that's important though, very, very important, for example, rape or child marriage or education of girls, education of women, but there are now women parliamentarians who are speaking about finance analysis because they're so well trained in statistics, they know banking so well that they can talk about statistics, financial condition of the country, as well as banking, etc., in the context of the development of women. So this is a major change that is taking place. But to go back a little bit, what happened in India was initially that the women's movement, what we teach basically in the universities and in the colleges, concentrates on some of the early reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy or Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay or Dayanand Saraswati, Jyotiba Phule. So these are people who fought for the rights of women undoubtedly and contributed a lot towards changing the mindsets of not only men, but also of the women. I think you'll know that initially when women fell sick, no male doctor, and all doctors were male then earlier, they could not come to see a woman or to suggest any kind of medication for the woman, and especially if she was delivering a child. Much later, the doctors came up, attitudes began to change, And with that, the life of women, the longevity of women also began to increase. But that was early in the 19th century. For some time, we had a gap in the course of the women's movement. The reason was not because Indian women were not aware of what was happening elsewhere or the rights that they should have, but because the political party then, the Congress Party, the All India Congress Party that had come up, there were sections who favored changes, socio-economic changes, educational changes to develop the position of women in this country. And many of these were also associated with general movements. This is the finest thing that happened in India. We have people like Sarojini Naidu. We have people, of course, some of them foreigners coming and staying here, Margaret Cousins, Annie Besant, who fought for the rights of women, but at the same time, fought also for home rule, fought also for strengthening the Congress. And while some favored that the Congress should have a separate section for women, Sarojini always voiced this concern that let us not be ghettoized, let us not be separated, but women's development is part of the human development. So in India, we had great leaders who focused on the position of women. But it was post-independence that the struggle for women actually began, and especially with the middle class and among the lower middle class groups. The very famous case that started the entire process, I would say it was the Mathura case in Bombay. Mathura was a young Adivasi woman. Today we'll call her a girl. And she used to come to work in Mumbai, where she was raped while she was selling her wares that she brought from the countryside onto Mumbai. She was raped in a police station. The Mumbai High Court said that a woman of her character was considered to be loose. She was an Adivasi woman. She was used to a free life. And if it comes to free life, they cannot be raped, according to the judges of the Mumbai High Court. So this brought about a huge furore in the entire country, especially in Delhi. And here the case of Mathura, simple girl, was picked up by the women in Delhi, and the case went on to the Supreme Court, where police was found guilty and Mathura was compensated, whatever little compensation could be given to her. So this case was an important case, not just because a rape had happened in police custody, not just because Supreme Court took up the cause of this woman, but also because the laws related to rape began to change. And it began to change in favor of women. And the latest in this entire sequence would be Justice J.S. Verma's, very recently after the Damini case, that J.S. Verma drew up. Of course, he died soon after, one of the finest legal mind that we had in India. He drew up a series of clauses to say how women should be heard in the court, that she should not be humiliated. There should be a free atmosphere where she can speak out her experiences. And that a rape case shall not be held in public. It will be held in a camera. Lots of changes began. compensation rights increased. It was no longer necessary for the woman to prove that she was raped. This was another serious flaw in our legal system. The woman had to prove it. But now it is the man who has to prove that he is innocent. Of course, we need to travel a long path in this, but the laws are coming into focus and are being gradually implemented. Still later, as we move on to the 80s, the women's movement became diversified in India. Several groups of women joined the political parties. For example, Congress had a women's section, the left parties had women's sections, but they were within the larger framework of the party. And especially among the left parties, it was noticed by the women there, the members, that the consortium that was there in the parties, that usually did not have women. The male voice, even in the left parties, predominated. Women were given minor tasks of looking after somebody who has been wounded, carrying letters from one place to another, or cooking food for the volunteers or the party members, so on and so forth. But again, not in the decision-making process. So a long fight began within the political party that they must have a say in party decisions and that women must get tickets to fight the election. One great thing about India was that women's right to suffrage came alongside men. In other nations, those nations that we call very forward nations, for example, England, for example, Finland, Australia, there the women could acquire their right to vote or suffrage much, much later. And over a period of time, some in the 80s. But that way, India proved to be a great pioneer because Indian women and Indian men got the right to vote at the same time. While these movements within the political parties grew, there was another set of concern that was going on. And that concern was, if we fight for the cause of women, for example, if you look at Ramshabai's case in Hyderabad. Ramshabai was the wife of a rickshaw puller. She was raped in front of her husband and the crowd that had gathered, and once again raised a huge hue and cry. So Mathura and Ramshabai are the two great cases that we have. There are many other cases that happen in Delhi in particular, bride burning because of dowry. And dowry deaths became gradually an issue before the women's bodies or the women's groups as a number of NGOs came up in 1970s. For example, one of them would be Saheli, still functioning in Delhi. But it was the universities that took it up, which is why I find it very surprising that today, apart from a few universities in this country, students are not picking up these issues to fight for the rights of the student, not only in the context of gender, but also the male students whose rights also need to be protected. But in those days, especially in the 80s, some of the colleges played a fantastic role. For example, the Indraprasth College, where the teachers and the students gathered together, blocked nearly half of Delhi. Delhi was then smaller, and forced the government to recognize the fact that dowry is a crime and that stringent laws should be enacted to prevent dowry deaths. Similarly, Miranda House students also came out in large numbers. But the one thing that kept on troubling them was that supposing we take up a cause, an example of a dowry death, in that case, how long can we support this woman? We can take her to the court, we can fight for her, we can fight for a compensation, but where does she stay? Because in our society, once a girl is married, the girl is supposed to be staying in the in-laws' place, and it's not very welcome. Few houses actually welcome back the daughter. Most houses don't. And I have my own experiences of the girls' home, which I used to earlier look after in Patna, in Gaighat, where little girls, 14 and 15, married at the age of 11 and 12, now in this age, whose husbands had left them, the parents are either split, the family has split, mother married somebody else, or the parents don't want her back. So she just staying in a very, very unhygienic kind of a situation in the woman's home. And that is how she kind of spends her life. So then the women began to debate, what is it? How can we help such women? And so we have non-political groups moving in who opened up women's homes, women's training centers. And if, as the government says now, if they succeed in the skill development programs, there's one program that was very successful in this country, was the self-help group program. Of course, we followed a little bit of the good example that Bangladesh had set, but India did very well also. Bihar did very well, especially the Jivika center that came up, the Jivika department that came up, that did very well and still doing well in Bihar. And nowadays they're thinking in terms, and already they've formed federations of such women. Now, who are these women actually? These are women who belong to a very lower economic group. And if some support can be given to them from the government, which the government now realizes, then they can do wonders. Similarly, then in the 80s, in Delhi and in other places, people began to think about working women's hostel and women's homes, widows' homes, so on and so forth. Some of the programs that did not succeed after the Vishakha judgment came. The Vishakha judgment is also an outcome of the Beijing conference. The Vishakha judgment said that women must be given security and that there should be shelter homes. I know that in Bihar, it did not really succeed. And I think all of you have read also in the newspapers that in some of the NGOs, there was tremendous amount of corruption. But these are few cases that we get. There's always room for further support, for further training. And I think the university has a major, major role to play when we talk about community development. We say that the universities must have the responsibility to develop also the community and not remain an island of excellence where teaching is done, which doesn't really benefit the society at large. So this can be strengthened now with so many universities in our state, elsewhere, I think a lot of good can be done for women who really need our support and help. It's not just fighting for their rights. For example, I do fight for their rights. As I belong to PUCL, I have seen how women have been tortured. I've seen how little girls have been raped as they go out because they don't have toilets. So they go out in the field in the early morning or in the evenings, and it is there that they're raped and gang raped. And now the usual practice is to kill them. But this can only be stopped, and more rights more authority can be given to women if there is a nexus between those of us who know better, who learned better about our conditions, but not about their conditions. And then we go out to them and create such communities where we can support women and their rights. So Delhi developed this, and Delhi became a major center for research. The tremendous research now that we have on gender, so much so that it's an independent topic now. It doesn't belong really to history or to sociology or to economics, but it's an absolutely independent subject in which it's multidisciplinary, in which even environment, so very important for women, has also been put in. But the Bombay movement is different. In Mumbai or in Maharashtra, women are greater activists. There are many, many organizations. For example, one very famous, some of you may have heard, Seva. Seva has done tremendous amount of work among the Adivasis and during riots in particular. Seva did very, very good work, and Seva still continues. Of course, it's split into a number of units today, but it's still one association to be reckoned with. Self-Employed Women's Association, Seva. So initially they said, how can you call it association and then register it like this? But they insisted, and so Seva is registered as an association, as Seva. So when in Delhi and in Bombay, one looking at research and the other looking at activism developed in India, we move forward in terms of gender. And as all of you know, that even in administration, some people do say that such women who had a background to it, for example, Indira Gandhi had a huge background, very strong background, or the other women who became chief ministers and so on and so forth, they do not actually represent the political strength of women because they had a legacy. And it's that legacy that catapulted them further into becoming a chief minister or a prime minister. But India did have, even before developed countries, even now America doesn't have a woman president. Yes, we've got a woman vice president now, but it still doesn't have a woman president. A lot of other countries gradually came up. But for Indians, it was easy to accept. And therefore, Indira Gandhi or other leaders from the South, they were accepted as leaders of the society. But today, if you notice the change, and the change because of the Panchayati Raj system, women are gradually moving into administration at the lowest level, which according to Gandhiji is the fundamental level of administration. And this is the level in panchayats where we give them reservation. But there are places, for example, in Bengal or in Maharashtra, where the entire panchayat is, I wouldn't say manned, I'll say womaned by women. All the members are women. And they've performed so well in terms of roads, in terms of primary school, because this is the immediate concern, their children's education, in terms of pure drinking water. So they are now moving forward and telling people that we can be just as good administrators as the men are. And now it is time that we have more members in the assembly. And more members, of course, in the parliament. But the number is less, but those who are there, they're extremely vocal. No less vocal than the men who are sitting there and sometimes use such bad words, shameful words for women, but they're not deterred, they're not disturbed. So in the future, as gradually years rolled on, what happened recently was 2 or 3 such administrative measures to which some women did not agree, or some families did not agree. And now, as you see, many of the movements are being led once again by women. If you look at the Kisan movement, you see in the Kisan movement, whether one agrees to it, doesn't agree to it, that's a different matter. Sociologically, it is significant. Historically, it is significant. That women who are as old as, say, 80, or young girls who are as young as 14 or 15, even smaller, are sitting there for 90 days, more than 90 days now, facing all the problems of climate, extreme cold, and now the hot weather, and a lot of other problems also, especially water, toilets, which become a problem for women to move out and to be in active life, but they're there. And this section of the women proves one thing very importantly, which we are trained from a very childhood to accept, and that is wrong, and that is earning is done by the male. It is not the males alone who earn, especially in the lower group, the Kisan lower category group. In agriculture, apart from preparing the field or plowing the field for agriculture, rest of the work in agriculture and the most difficult work of paddy transplantation. There's this very famous activist called Bela Bhatia, and Bela did a study of women who transplanted rice and how difficult it was for these women as it hurt them, and especially their private parts got injured because of the water in the field that leads to the rise of water vapor, which is hot. And still the whole day they bend and do the transplantation. It's not done by the men. Cutting, the use of the sickle, both men and women both do it. Then all the winnowing and the husking that goes on. Haryana, Punjab, they have mechanized it, but in Bihar, if you go to the village areas, you'll find that the women are the ones who are working. So it is illogical to say that the men are the rice owners. They're not. They've claimed to be the rice owners, the bread givers. The women do a huge bit of work. And the Kisan rallies that are going on actually prove that women understand that they have a stake in that land, not for themselves, but for their children. And so they say that we will not accept this or we will not accept something else. So new voices, a collective voice is coming up. And the other would be the Citizenship Act, which was opposed. Once again, one agrees to it or doesn't agree to it. That, to me, is not as important as how the women faced the physical and the mental torture while they sat at Shaheen Bagh, while they sat at Pulwari, or in Sabzi Bagh, or near Buddha Smriti Park. Entire days they sat there. Because not just Muslims, even the very poor Hindu women, referred to as Hindus, they had no idea, they had no papers. They didn't even know what their grandparents' name was. And even if you now ask the person who works at your house, when were you born? The lady or the servant will not know when he was born. And to have papers to prove that I was born here on so-and-so date was something that the women did not accept. And they faced the police. They faced once again tremendous cold weather. Many of them were put to jail, who were slightly vocal, were put to jail. Large number of them were fighting for the environment. For example, very recently, the case of Disha. I think all of you have heard of her. A young little girl, 22 years old, being inspired by another younger girl in Germany, developed environmental toolkits and presented that on a road in Bangalore. There was nothing absolutely against the government. It was about saving environment. And it was about or against some of the constructions that were taking place, which was making it even more difficult for the lower economic strata to live. And so Disha was arrested. And soon thereafter, because no case could be presented, and the Supreme Court chastised the police and said, do not take such people into custody when you don't have a case against them. You waste our time and you're going against their rights to demonstrate in a democracy. This was a great judgment, recent judgment that the Supreme Court gives in the case of this little girl. And this little girl, barely 22, Disha, also said that if me going to the jail betters the environmental policy of the country, is better for the farmers who are sitting on fast, I would like to continue and stay in prison. Then journalists now, what courage they have. In the Hathras case, all of us know about the Hathras case. The journalists who actually moved forward and accosted the police, forced the police to turn around and say, who's preventing you from talking? Have you been asked to keep quiet? The police didn't know what to do. These were women journalists who were there. So this awareness is growing, that one is not just a reproducer, and even if one is a reproducer, one is doing a great work for which women should be respected. The woman is also a producer. So in that sense, doing a tremendous lot for the society, both as a producer and as a reproducer. And it is time now that we begin to question, or rather before that, begin to form collectives. You can't fight it alone. You see, I have a maidservant at home. She has this Vridha pension, as they call it. The Mukhya doesn't listen to her. It's not been updated. And the bank, in the bank, there's a woman who sits there. And when she goes there, she says, I don't have time. So come sometime later, then I'll put your Aadhaar card in my computer. And maybe for 6 months, she's not getting her something which is a right, her Vridha pension. It's just 400. And even 400 they don't give her. There also some money is fleeced off. And now with the gas cylinders and the prices going up, little bit of pension that they get, and even that is not regular. We need to really, in fact, day for yesterday, I was with the Musa women. They formed SHGs, which are not agarbatti producing SHGs, but SHGs that are fighting and demonstrating before the BDOs so that they get the money that is due to them. So collectivity is very important if women have to come forward. Similar collectivities in universities, where even now, I don't know about AN College, but I know about Patna University, the harassment, the anti-sexual harassment cell virtually doesn't function. Girls are scared to come up. They are scared to narrate what's happened to them. So they don't come up. It's we need to come together and give them the strength and their mother the strength or the families the strength that they should come forward and speak. So one, collective, and the second is to break the culture of silence. Chuppi ke sanskriti ko torna, to break the culture of silence. And then question why institutions are not working. Why are our lower courts not functioning? Why are the BDO offices not functioning? Why are our health centers not catering to the needs of the women and their children? So this why, to question why, becomes very important. And so today is basically a celebration. Yes, we are celebrating. We've moved forward. India has moved really forward in terms of women coming out in the open as compared to what it was earlier and fighting for their rights. Even the marriage incident that took place recently, where the father cut the head of the girl because she married in another caste, another family. And with that severed head, the father went to the police station and said, I've killed my daughter because that was my duty. She did not listen to me when I said you could not marry the boy that you wanted to marry. There will be such cases. Hathras will be repeated. Gang rapes will continue. But we must also question the media. But how is the media reporting such cases? How much of space do you give to women? And sometimes I feel, just like in Europe, where some of the women had started their own newspapers. So even in places like Bihar or in India, we have magazines. For example, Manushi is very well brought out. One of the first of its kind, Manushi. But we need to have more newspapers where women's news are brought into focus. And why? So on this International Day, I did not think I will speak so much because it's basically all of us celebrating. Yes, it's a time to celebrate, basically. COVID, I could not touch, but COVID will change as it is changing the world. COVID will bring in a new consciousness, a new awareness, new strength. And women will also learn to speak out when such things happen. So thank you very much. And I wish all of you who I see here on the screen a very, very happy Women's Day. And I sincerely hope that women, along with men, will get the right to better our society because we can give a lot, but situations have not been created where we can give a lot. That is our responsibility. It's a jimmewari. We've been educated well, and we should do some duties also for the other women who did not get this opportunity. Thank you, Ratna. Thank you, sir. And thanks to everybody.
Thank you so much, Daisy ma'am, for such a powerful lecture and substantiated with examples. You told us about the history of International Women's Day and also that the fight for our rights has come a long way, but there is a long way to go. And here I would like to end with these few words. अभी न पूछो हमसे मंजिल कहाँ है, अभी तो हमने चलने का इरादा बना लिया है, न हारे हैं न हारेंगे कभी, ये किसी और से नहीं खुद से वादा किया है. Now I invite Dr. Amrita Chakraborty to deliver the vote of thanks. Amrita, unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon to all. It is my immense pleasure to extend my vote of thanks in this occasion of celebrating International Women's Day. First of all, I would like to thank our chief guest, Professor Dr. Daisy Narain, for delivering her invaluable lecture. My sincere thankfulness to respected Principal Sir, Professor S.P. Sahi, for his constant encouragement. I am also thankful to IQAC Chairman, Dr. Arun Kumar Sir, for always being our inspiration. I also wish to express my gratitude to Program Coordinator, Dr. Ratna Amrit, for organizing such a beautiful program. My heartfelt thanks to all the members of IQACN College for making this program a grand success. Finally, I want to thank all participants for their patience hearing and support. Thank you one and all again, and happy Women's Day to all women.
Thank you, Amrita.
Thank
And
you. Thank you,
thank
madam.
everybody. Anyone has any question to ask her, you can, and then we'll disperse. Daisy ma'am, unmute yourself. Unmute.
Can I just
Yeah.
take 1 second?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just read out a few lines. This is a song, Dance of Liberation. This is by the Tamil nationalist poet Subramaniam Bharati. And I'll just read half of it translated into English. He starts like this: Dance, rejoice. Those who said it is evil for women to touch books are dead. The lunatics who said they would lock women in their houses cannot show their faces now. They showed us our place in the home as if we were bullocks, bred and beaten to dumb labor. We have ended that. So sing and dance.
Now, all of us, again, very happy International Women's Day to everyone. And we disperse now. Thank you so much, Daisy ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
madam.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
meeting you all once again. Thanks a lot. And I don't think, as Satna said, I'm a guest here because
No, madam.
I feel myself to be at home when I'm with you. So it was not I who was speaking. I was speaking on behalf of all of you. So that is it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, madam.